And I think that's why it's so important to really break down and define what your process is. It's so cliche. You hear coaches and just people say all the time, trust the process, focus on the process, right? But it's like, do you really know what that means for you? And
Mm.
that's one of the first things that I'm doing with my athletes is really breaking down what that is. So instead of thinking, I really want to play well today. Okay, yes, obviously you want to play well, but what are all the small things that you can focus on that will help you play well today?
Welcome to the Performance Initiative Podcast. Our goal is to provide you and ourselves with the tools to be the best versions of ourselves. We are your hosts, Dr. Grant Cooper and Dr. Zinovy Meyler. That was a fun conversation. That happened to be really very informative as well.
It did. We just finished speaking with Georgia Miller. Georgia is a mental performance coach for peak performance sports. She has helped countless numbers of athletes reach their own peak performance. And I got a lot out of that conversation. I feel like the lessons that she has about mental performance for sports translates so well into just about every aspect of life. I feel more prepared for the next podcast.
Absolutely.
I really feel like there's so much that everyone can take away from this, and she is a great storyteller, and just a delight to talk to.
We think you'll enjoy it.
Georgia, thank you so much for joining us for a conversation today. We're really excited to get to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I'm also excited. Looking forward to our conversation.
The topic of performance psychology, sports psychology is really, I mean, it goes into so many different aspects. And we were talking about where to start. There were so many places that we could start off the conversation, but I thought maybe I could take you back to 1991. Uh, any Giants fan and Buffalo Bills fan will already probably know where this is going.
Oh,
You're self-evidently too young to have certainly lived through this, but you maybe have heard of it too. It was
probably.
Super Bowl, Giants and Bills, end of the game. Um, Scott Norwood gets a chance to win the Super Bowl for the Bills with a field goal with no time left or almost no time left. Well, as a Giants fan, this is actually a happy memory. But sorry to all of our Bills fans out there. Um, but anyway, far right, right? He gets at the last moment. He kicks it far right, doesn't go in. For a lot of sports fans, that moment becomes synonymous with choking under pressure, right? Not fair to Scott Norwood. There were extenuating circumstances. The laces were off to the right, which impacted the kick. He wasn't really known for long kicks anyway. But all that aside, for a lot of us sports fans, that moment becomes, you know, what it means to unfortunately choke under pressure, fair or not. And so we thought, how do how do you think about those high pressure, high stakes moments, and what goes wrong and what goes right for high level athletes in those times?
Yeah. Well, I don't think you need to take that back to 1991. I think that has happened at least 5 times this past NFL season. Watching it. Yeah. So
Hundred
many
percent,
kicks just
hundred
going
percent.
wide and right, right? Yeah.
As a
And it,
Giants fan, I like to go back to that moment. It was
yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah. And I'm not a Bills fan, so we can talk about it. It's fine. But yeah, in those high pressure moments, I think two things happen. One, their thoughts change up. And two, something happens in their body. They either get really tense or maybe they're just like a little too relaxed. But in those high pressure situations, they're probably just feeling very tense and they aren't sticking to something that they're used to. They're completely abandoning their process, abandoning their routine. Those little doubts might creep in their mind, like, what if I miss this? Or even worse, they're thinking, I have to make this, and all those I have tos and shoulds, those are big trigger words for me. So they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves, like, okay, I have to miss this. And then they might be thinking, if I don't miss this, then, or if I don't make this,
right,
then I'm losing this game in front of thousands and thousands of fans, especially like Super Bowl, right?
right,
Right.
right.
The entire game is on you as a kicker. So yeah, those little doubts might creep in, the fear might creep in, and it overtakes those actions that you've been training for years and years to do. All that muscle memory that you have built up, you aren't trusting it anymore. Now, instead of just focusing on making the kick, you can be focused on avoiding a mistake. And that leads you to tense up and your body does something crazy like miss it wide right, or you're thinking don't miss it and your body overcorrects and completely misses it right. So a lot of things are going on, but it really starts with what's going on in your head. And then what you're thinking makes you feel a certain way and it impacts your body and what it's doing. So your mind and your body have to be aligned. So those pressure situations are great moments to test how tough your mental game is.
So how do you keep yourself in that moment? How do you not let those thoughts intrude and take you out of, presumably, I'm sure we'll get into like a flow state, a sense of presence.
Yeah, it's so different for everybody. And I think that's why it's so important to really break down and define what your process is. It's so cliche. You hear coaches and just people say all the time, trust the process, focus on the process, right? But it's like, do you really know what that means for you? And
Mm,
that's one of the first things that I'm doing with my athletes is really breaking down what that is. So instead of thinking, I really want to play well today, okay, yes, obviously you want to play well, but what are all the small things that you can focus on that will help you play well today? I was working with a college lawn snapper. This is a great example. And he kind of had the yips. His snaps were going far, wide, and right every time. And so we're like, okay, well, what's your process? Break it down. What are you doing every single time? And we basically just made a little script in his head that he can stick to. And we said, okay, get set, lock in, deliver. And all right, direct my vision, deliver. Like we literally made step by steps for him to come back to in those moments when his mind was drifting away and getting really distracted. So it's so important that you have those little actions that are in your control you can come back to. Maybe you have a little breath routine that puts you back into the present moment. It's important that you know how to refute any doubts that come into your head. And a lot of times with my athletes, to prepare them for big moments like that, we're breaking down a lot of potential challenges. What are a lot of challenges that you can anticipate happening in your game this weekend? And let's come up with responses that you can have on the spot so you know exactly what you're going to do when that moment arises. So you're more prepared for it.
do you mean physically or mentally when you say that? Like the things that'll come up. You mean things that like stresses from, I don't know, trash talk or another, the fans or whatever, or do you mean more situational things in a game?
Yeah, I ask it and then I kind of go wherever the athlete takes it, whatever comes
Mm,
up for them. So both things. Yeah, like absolutely. Like if a teammate starts talking trash to you, is that going to take you out of the moment? Is that going to make you frustrated? So absolutely, that might be something that we talk about in tennis. Oh my gosh, there's so many cheaters in tennis, especially like in high school, you have to call your own lines. And that's something that I'm working on a lot with my high school tennis players.
that
Is
drives me crazy,
okay.
by the way, as an aside.
Yes, yes.
And now they
Yeah,
have
right.
courts, they could just put the cameras on and then
Like
they could,
cameras.
oh.
I know. It's just, like, so
My son
unique to
plays tennis and I
tennis.
I just
Yeah.
yes, yeah, it's a yeah.
Yeah, it's
Sorry, that's
a
it.
huge yeah, huge challenge. I was talking to one of my tennis girls last night about it, and so
Mhm.
that was a challenge that we had prepared her for. We're like, "Okay, what are you gonna do when this happens?" We literally made, like, 3 different steps for her, and her emotions were very high, but she already knew what she was gonna do in that moment. She didn't really have to think about it. So yeah, things like cheaters, trash talking. Let's say if you completely airball it, like what are you gonna do then? Or coach
Mhm.
yells at you, you get taken out. Bunch of different stuff like that. Those challenges that are unique to them that typically might set them off. We're preparing them for those.
And then, so you mentioned physical and mental, right? And does one inform the other? Are they equally important, or given that we're talking about psychology of performance, is it the way the person reacts to whatever the physical tightness or too loose, too tight, and which one is more important, or does it all come back to your mental processing of it?
I think they're both equally important. And I think that's a mistake that sometimes professionals in our field can make is that we get so locked in on what they're doing mentally and the cognitive side of it. But we also need to really get at the physiological side of it, right? If you're feeling all these nerves, we need to give you some ways to release those nerves. They go hand in hand, absolutely. But a great example of this is like if you're thinking before your game, what if I mess up? Well, okay, how's that making you feel? Probably
Probably
tense.
tense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, anxious, nervous. Okay. If you're feeling or thinking, what if I do great today? What if it's like my breakout game? You're probably feeling a little bit more excited. That gets you're a little more ready for the game, right? So what's easier, I think, is to start up here, taking control of one little thought, and then we'll give you some good like progressive muscle relaxation, some deep breathing exercises to help release those, but we got to pair them together to make sure you're kind of releasing that tension out of your body.
Mm. So it starts with the internal dialogue that you're having with yourself. And then
Yeah.
you also have some relaxation, sort of almost like a secondary compensation strategies if that comes up.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And like the breathing exercise is so great. But they're also kind of like a band-aid, right? We need to get at
Right.
what your deep inner beliefs are with that. And right, exactly what you said. Yeah, that inner dialogue is so important. We're talking about self-talk probably every single session with an athlete.
Yeah.
It's we're always taught how to talk to other people, how to respect your elders, coaches, patients, right? Parents, but we're never truly taught how to talk to ourselves, and a lot of times we're saying things to ourselves that we would never say to other people.
Right, right. Almost always. Almost
Yeah.
always. Right. But there are some athletes that seems to me respond best with coaches that are hard on them, right? And there are some athletes that respond better when coaches are more encouraging. So is there one sort of internal dialogue that you try to promote with people? In other words, like I imagine like, if you're trying to be a healthy, happy person, then you want to basically have a positive dialogue with yourself. And that's something that, most people need to work on and it's important. But when it comes to a competitive situation, are there times when you don't want a healthy, happy dialogue because it's just not going to resonate for that person to push that person over, where maybe they do want more of a come on, you fill in the blank, don't be such a fill in the blank and get up and go.
Mhm.
I don't
Mhm.
know, or no, is that really ultimately Bobby Knightish kind of self-defeating and you want to keep it positive all the time?
I It's so dependent on the athlete, right? But as humans, naturally, we have a big negativity bias. So
Mm,
most athletes that start with us, I'd say they're probably pretty negative in their own head. So the
yeah.
thought of being positive to them is just a lot. It's like you're telling me to say everything's okay and think positively. They're like, "No, you're crazy."
Right.
Right? So I don't sit here and tell my athletes to be positive, but I say we got to be productive. Let's say you make a mistake and you're saying, "Oh, I suck today. Why is that happening?" That's not necessarily helping move you forward.
Mm,
Complete opposite end of a spectrum saying, "It's okay, everything's fine," after you just struck out, that's not really
that's
doing
not
the
okay.
job either. But if you're saying, "What's my plan of action? How am I moving on from this?" That's productive. What can I focus on to
Mhm.
focus on the next play, right? And I use this example all the time. If you're standing in the middle of a burning building and you're asking, "Why did this happen?" or "This sucks," it's not getting you out. And if you're saying everything's fine, that's not getting you out either. But how am I getting out of here? That's productive. That moves you forward.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm not saying let's be positive all the time, but let's be productive. That tends to resonate and work well for everybody.
And you're in your experience, I mean, you're talking about somebody who's well aware of their internal dialogue. Do you ever get people that tell you, "I don't talk to myself. I don't say anything to myself."
Mm,
Does that ever come up? How do you
Oh,
uncover it?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the first step in changing anything is to build their self awareness around it.
mm,
Mhm.
So yeah, it's like let's say if I'm meeting with an athlete first time and I say, okay, well, what's going through your head after a mistake? They're like, I don't really know, actually. Most of the time they do know. But if they don't, then I'm gonna have them probably start to log it. So okay, after your practices today, I want you to sit down for 1 minute and just log what your thoughts were after mistakes. And you say that, then they're going to be looking for it more in their
mm.
practices and just throughout their day-to-day life and routines. So the first step is just building their self-awareness around it and how that's directly impacting their next action. Um, so yeah, a lot of it is just helping them figure out what they're saying and what they're doing when they're doing well and what they're doing when they're not doing well.
Friends, we hope you're finding value in the content. If you're enjoying what you're watching, please consider hitting the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on the notification button to stay up to date with everything going on in the channel. I'll bet just being aware of it has a therapeutic impact, right? Just gaining that awareness of like, oh, I am shitting on myself all the time. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It seems to me that like in my imagination anyway, I would think that when there's a big moment, you kind of want the player to always be in the same zone, so that whether it's a big moment or a small moment, they're always sort of doing the same basic types of things. But if you have like a relaxation strategy that you're employing in these big moments, does that I guess I see it as a risk of taking someone out of the moment and going into another part of the brain where you say, okay, I'm freaking out, so I'm going to go do this for this particular play. You know what I mean? Like, does that is there a balance there, or how do you manage that? Because I like, for example, with the long snapper, I imagine if he's going through the same process every single time, that's probably ideal. But if he's, well, I'm going to go through that process whenever I'm feeling, stressed out. To me, that just seems like there would be a risk of taking you even further out of the moment because now you're doing something you don't usually do.
Right. Yeah. And then we're talking about forming a routine. That long stepper, he was doing that every single time.
Mm,
We were implementing that in practice. And I wouldn't help an athlete implement something that they've never done. Like, let's say they have a huge championship game coming up. We aren't going to be doing anything different than what they're
right.
used to, right? If we're changing any sort of part of their routine, we're doing it in practice first to make sure it works and to make sure they like it and to start forming a habit. That way it's really familiar to them. That's why it's so important that they have their process and routines to come back to so they can find comfort amongst all that chaos and different environment that's going on around them. So,
Right.
yeah, we make sure it's comfortable and it's a part of their routine. That way it's not something that's triggering them in the
Right.
moment if it's a big or different moment. Yeah.
What's your time frame on creating a change? For instance, someone in the season, arguably every game is important. And when they're not right, whatever that means, when do you take the risk of introducing that change?
Mm,
Because you said not before a big game, right? But if you are to introduce a game, is that only in the off season, or are you do you have a safety time frame
mm,
where you have 4 weeks before a bigger game and you can take a risk with the next game? Is there a time frame that you're working with?
Not really. I would say huge time frame for more of the physical skills. So, for example, with my baseball guys and softball girls, they'll get a lot of coaches trying to fix their swing going into a game. And I'm like, No, let's not fix your swing going into a game because instead of focusing on fixing your swing or instead of hitting the ball, you're focused on fixing your swing.
mhm,
And that's not going to help you just hit the ball somewhere,
right.
right? Or
Right.
same thing with golf. If you're focused on your stroke, you weren't focused on just hitting the ball down the fairway.
Yeah.
So more so with physical skills, there should be a timeline. Off season, great time to change up your mechanics and your swing.
Mm.
For mentally, I just want to make sure that they like it and it resonates with them and they're comfortable with it. So ideally, I'd say like one or two practices to make sure that you have something to come back to that you like. In a game, right? If they don't do it, they don't do it. There's not really a huge risk. But for physical skills, there's probably a bigger risk. You're going to see it show up in your outcomes.
Yeah. Is there an optimal mental state that you like to see your athletes get into before a game? Is there, you know what I mean? Like, is there like I always think of the flow state, right? You think of Michael Jordan just not able to miss a shot, that kind of thing. But is there a singular mental state, or how do you think of that?
I think getting into that flow state is overrated. And I think a lot of athletes can get lost in trying to find that. Like,
Mm,
oh, why aren't I always feeling good? Or why can't I just do that every single game? It's so unrealistic.
mm,
So, what I like to do is ask them, okay, take me back to a time when you played really well. How are you feeling before the game? Were you more excited and hyped up, or were you more relaxed and calm? And it's really dependent on the athlete. So, if you play better when you're more hyped up, then let's figure out a good little routine for you, good skills and techniques to get you hyped up before your game if that's where you play your
Right.
best. If you need to be more relaxed and calm and need to go find a corner and meditate somewhere, then let's do that to get you in
Mhm.
your optimal state here. But yeah, I'm never really
That's
telling
a great.
athletes, "Oh, let's make sure like you're getting into the zone." I just think they can get really caught up in that. And then
Yeah.
if they aren't in the zone, then they're looking for it. But if you're looking for that zone state, it's you're never going to find it. It comes to you when you're just in the moment and you're doing your job and executing plays and you're very present.
It's just like any awareness state, right? If you're meditating and you become aware that you're meditating, you're no longer you're
Meditate.
no longer in that awareness state.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's so interesting that everyone has their own way of getting into the competition. So one of the legends of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Marcelo, reportedly would sleep before his big matches, just literally fall asleep and be awakened a couple of minutes before he has to go on the mat.
Is that right?
Yeah, and it sounds crazy, but
Yeah.
this is a combat sport essentially, and someone who doesn't hype themselves up just falls asleep, gets up, gets on the mat, and wins.
Yeah.
And that does not work for everyone.
Well, if you just think
No.
of, I mean, if you watch a UFC fight night, right, you see some fighters before a fight that are, let's go. And then
Yeah.
there's one, Carla Esparza. She's a female. She was a champ for a little bit. And she, before a fight, she looks like she's about to fall asleep. Like she has no emotion. She's completely calm. And you're like, does she know she's about to do this? But that's, to your point, I think she's found what works for her. And that's what puts her closest to a good state, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, and you wanna work with athletes what works best for them, you don't really wanna jump in and tell them, "Oh, let's change everything that you're doing up." Well,
Yeah.
let's get a good foundation of what you're already doing, and let's see how we can improve that for you. So, yeah, it's gonna be different for everyone.
If you have someone who's having a bad day, not, like they start the game or whatever, and it's not going well.
Yeah.
How do you pull them, or how do you help them pull themselves out of that?
Yeah. So many different ways. I think a good conversation to have around that is what are the questions that you're asking yourself? A lot of the times athletes are asking, why is this happening? And that leads to overanalyzing, overthinking, and trying to fix things in a game. And
Mm.
it's very internal and me, why is this happening to me? And it's
Mm.
completely taking your focus away from the play. So you want your focus to be very external on what it is that you're doing. And I talk a lot about the golden question. My golden question is, what can I do for my teammates? The
Mm.
answer to that is always something productive. It puts your focus on other people. And I think if you're always giving and focusing on others, naturally that's just making you feel better,
Right.
right? And it takes it off of you and you are overthinking. That question gives you something very specific to do and focus on.
That's great. That's good lesson for life too, I think. I mean, people are generally less happy when they focus on themselves,
Yeah.
right? It's like you do everything is better when you put others first. It's cliche, but it's completely true.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
tell them if they're in an individual sport? If they're,
Right.
then
Yeah.
help your teammate. I'm my teammate.
Yeah. I know. Yeah.
I'm
Then it
done.
might just be like, okay, what now? What
Yeah.
can I do now? Maybe it's all right.
Right.
I need to choose an open spot on the court. Okay, I need to do that. Maybe I just need to really focus on moving my feet and getting my feet there.
Mhm.
But you really just want to simplify it for them. Because typically, if they're in their head having a bad day, they're overthinking. Again, it's very like internal. You want to get them focused on something that's external, something that they can physically and actually do. So helping them just find one cue to focus on is going to be important. But in tennis, it's really different. You really have to work with your players on it because they don't have a coach in their ear. At least the younger ones don't. They aren't allowed to be coached, right? So it's important that you're empowering them with the skills that they can do that for themselves and making sure that you're helping them do that in practice because if a coach is always telling them what to do in practice, then they're going to be used to that
Right.
come tournament time. It's like where's this little voice in my ear? He's not telling me what to do.
Yeah, that's interesting. I forgot because they started to allow coaching in the pros, right? So,
Yeah.
not they still don't up through college, high school? I don't
College? I actually don't know. High school, they
high
don't.
school,
I don't
yeah.
have any college tennis players right now, so I'll have to look into that.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What
Yeah.
about someone? How do you approach someone who just had a big failure?
Hmm,
Yeah. It's a
How do you
good
get them back?
question. Yeah. A lot of different ways. I think it's gonna sound cliche, but we gotta figure out what was the big lesson, what was the takeaway in that failure, and how can you use that as confidence going forward, knowing that you have this experience. And okay, what did you learn from it? That way you can apply this exact lesson in the future whenever a very similar situation comes up. Getting them to have a takeaway from it is probably the most important thing, and I always tell them, "Listen, we don't know why this happened, but I guarantee you something is gonna happen in the future where this failure is gonna make so much sense." And
hmm,
it's awesome when you're working with an athlete for a long period of time and you can see that. It's like,
Mhm.
"Oh, that did happen for a reason, and this is how I applied that failure to this." But failure is, oh my gosh, that's a very popular conversation that we're having. And if you are able to learn from failures and embrace your failures, knowing that makes you better, it's so much easier, right? But typically, when an athlete comes to us, they have a big fear of failure because they work so hard and
right.
they, don't want others to think bad of them. They are afraid of not reaching their goals. So that's something that we got to really start having conversations on and preparing them for from the beginning so they aren't looking to avoid failure. Because if failure is so scary in their head, then you're going to be looking to avoid it versus just playing to compete and have fun.
Hmm. How much does having fun play into a positive state of mind for these competitive athletes?
Yeah.
Is that
I'm
important?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm never, like, sitting here telling the athlete, "Just have fun." They
Right,
they normally need a little bit more than that. I tell the parents, like, Listen, this is your role. You need to tell them to have fun before their games."
right.
If they're older, like college or professional, they probably aren't having their parent telling them to have fun, right? At a certain point, it becomes your job.
Yeah.
But for, most people, when you're playing your best, you're having fun. You're having
Mhm,
fun doing it. And we got to really figure out what leads to you having fun. Probably when you're in the moment, probably when you're focused on your teammates, you're giving, probably when you're letting go and you're moving on, you aren't so attached to those mistakes. So we
right.
really got to break down what having fun means and how can we focus on the small things to help get you there.
Is there an element of rather than having an internal dialogue, all the time, as much as possible to not have any dialogue? Just, this sort of shut your mind off, or is that unrealistic?
I think that's ideal. When players and people just in general are in the zone, they aren't really thinking much. They're
Right.
just doing, right? But it's so important to have that great internal dialogue that that works for you so you can pull yourself back into the moment and give
Mhm.
yourself something productive to focus on. But yeah, it's going to be very hard to tell someone, "Oh, just don't think about it." It's
Right,
like,
right,
well,
right,
how
right,
do I not do
right.
that, right? So let's just make sure that you're thinking about the good things that are going to help you. And then obviously, if you get to that flow state where you aren't thinking about much, awesome, run with it.
Right, 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 right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So much of this, it seems like, crosses over to other parts of life outside of sports. I mean,
Mm.
basically all of it so far. Seems to me like has a good correlate outside of. Do you find that people that are having issues within this sport, do those issues also happen outside of their sport? And then when you talk to them, do they find that that helps them outside of the sport as well?
Yeah. Sometimes. Yeah. So let's say, I would say 9 of the 10 of our athletes are perfectionists.
Hmm.
And it's interesting to ask them, are you a perfectionist outside of your sport, just like with relationships or school or work? And sometimes they'll be like, oh, yes. And sometimes they'll be like, no, only in my sport.
Hmm.
So that's an interesting conversation to have too. But a lot of times, especially for like high school athletes, we'll get a lot of parents calling in and they say, listen, my child was in counseling, but they didn't really love it. And I'm thinking the sports psychology route will just be better for them. Like, and it always typically works
Hmm.
because they love their sport, and who doesn't want to get better at their sport, right?
Ah,
They relate to this, they apply these concepts to other areas of their life. Whereas general counseling, sometimes they want to talk about their sport, but it's a lot harder for them to apply those strategies to their sport.
yeah. And also, I would imagine that, especially for teenagers, I would just guess that a lot of issues they might be having will come out in their sport, right? Like, I mean, if they're having, if they're having home issues or school issues, and that'll come out as aggression or not being able to concentrate, or any number of ways when they're trying to, be at a high performing level.
Yeah, yeah, and, if, like, and I don't, let's say if an athlete's parents just got divorced, right? I'm not necessarily talking to them about divorce, but if that divorce is coming into your play and a big distraction for you, then yeah, we need to talk about how you're refocusing and giving you tools to do that. So if
Mhm.
they aren't leaving their outside problems out of their sport when they walk into the gym or walk into the pool, wherever it is, then that's definitely going to negatively impact them. So, really breaking down all of their distractions is really important, not just in their sport, but also outside of sport. So they know they can recognize when they're thinking about it and then say stop and then just refocus on what it is that's most important in that moment.
Is there an age that you think people should start thinking about these things, or are there ages that are too young? You're like, parents want me to see a 6-year-old, and that's just not it's not realistic.
Yeah, that's a funny question because we'll get parents calling in asking about their 6-year-old, and I'm like, "Oh, no. I'm sorry. I cannot work with a 6-year-old." Um, Mainly because it's just hard for them to understand some of these concepts. The
Right.
youngest I've worked with was a 9-year-old, and I only took them on because they were very mature.
Hmm.
They gotta be able to talk, they gotta be able to tell you what's going on inside their head. If they can't do that, it's like pulling teeth. It's not fun. It's awful for them, it's awful for me. So, I think at 12 is a good age if they're mature enough to start, like, the one-on-one coaching.
Hmm.
I just set up, some like, basically, like, a little workbook program for a 10-year-old and his parents do with him because,
Yeah.
sometimes the parents at that age can get to them a little bit better than maybe I can, right?
Sure.
So, yes, there is, definitely an age that's too young. You just wanna those kids just wanna have fun, right? Like, you just wanna, like, have fun, enjoy your sport. Let's
Yeah.
not put so much pressure on you to do mental game coaching, right? Or sports psychology. Yeah, so I'd say, like, 13 is ideal.
Yeah.
Um, I'll only work with them if they're really mature, like a really mature 10-year-old.
Right. 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 How often is it the dynamic between the student and the parents that needs to be worked on more than anything else? That
Yeah, a
must come
lot.
up, right? That must. I mean, we're spine and sports doctors, and we see it with when we see high school kids, and they're sometimes the parents are. I mean, sometimes they're great. Sometimes it's a great unit, and sometimes it's completely dysfunctional. It's
Yeah, yeah. I want to hear about your all's experience too. So that's a lot of what I do here. So I work one on one with athletes. That's my main job. Team seminars, team workshops, and then a lot of what I do is working with the sport parents because typically, if a parent of a 10-year-old is calling in saying that they're fearing failure and feeling so much pressure, I'm sure it came from the
right.
parent in some way. So I might do like a couple sessions with the athlete, but typically I'll end up working with the parent and how
Yeah.
to help them um not put so much pressure on their athlete. And that can be kind of cool because most parents, I would say, are very receptive and aware that, hey, I'm part of the problem. Help me, please. Because
Mm.
they just want best for their child, right? Some parents are not receptive at all and they will shut you down real quick. And those are the athletes that I feel bad for.
Yeah.
Um, but most parents are really receptive, and that's cool. You get to work with, like, a whole family unit on helping them just enjoy their sport better and communicate better as a family. So that is a cool part about working with the younger athletes is keeping the parents involved in it.
Right. 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 Right.
Yeah. But just a small pivot. Um, you mentioned goals and how do you work with athletes that are setting goals? And goals are important in many ways, right? But how do you avoid goals becoming oppressive in themselves?
Yeah. And this is gonna sound funny. I'm not a huge goal setting person.
Okay.
I'm I am more concerned about what are the little things that they're doing every single day to help them get to those goals. Typically, athletes know what their dream goals are. I'm saying, okay, what are the things that you're doing every single day to set you up for that though?
Mhm.
I think knowing your why is more important. Having that dream goal in mind is so great. And typically, a lot of times, that dream goal is tied to your why. Um, Most of the times when I'm asking an athlete what their why is, they're like, well, it's fun. I really enjoy it and I love it. Awesome. That's great. Dream goal might be I want to play in college. I want to make it professionally one day. Awesome. Okay. We can break that goal down with them, right? I might not touch goal setting with them though until months into our work. But I really make sure that they know their why because the why is what gets you through all of those hard, challenging times.
Mm.
You know, not everyone loves to get up at 5 a.m. for workouts, but you do it because you love it, and you got to remember your why to get you through those hard times. I know a lot of different sports psychology coaches who start off with goal setting, and that's great. But I just think like knowing your why is more important, and those small daily things that you're doing, making sure you have routine set in place, all the mental skills set in place. And then if we get into goal setting, yeah, we can totally get into goal setting, and that might work really well for an athlete who's maybe like a lot more structured and they like to see it all laid out. And then some athletes don't really care about goal setting. So it honestly, it depends. If they love it, I'll go right along with it. But I kind of stay away from it, at least for the first couple months.
I feel like the why, I mean, that's like, that's just like life, right? You always need your why if you're really going to push yourself to do anything great.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what, and I talk about a lot about love too, making sure love is involved. If you're giving to others, you love your sport, you love your teammates, that's what you need. You need to love your sport in order to keep going with it. You need to love your sport in order to play in college. If you don't love your sport, but mom and dad sure love it, that's not going to be very long lasting. That's
Right.
not going to get you very far.
Yeah. And you see a lot of college athletes. I mean, I had a bunch of friends in my freshman year who played football, lacrosse, all different sports. And by the time they were juniors, I would say like 90% of them had stopped, right?
Mhm.
Probably because they didn't have their why, or the why was get into college,
Yeah.
and and then they realized it's not for them. But
Yeah. And it's okay to stop loving something.
yeah,
It probably taught you so many great things, but yeah, if you don't love it, another 4-year commitment in college is gonna be miserable for you.
same.
It's not gonna last, yeah.
Can I pivot to my gym question?
Do it.
I had a question about it. There's always these athletes that are amazing in the gym or amazing in practice. It happens in martial arts a lot. I think it probably happens in every sport where you have people who are just, like the people that play with them outside of the competition say, this is the best person, around. But for some reason, when they get into competition, they just can't bring it together. They can't show their skill set. Any thoughts on why or how to overcome that?
Yeah. That's the number one sign for me that it's a mental challenge. If you're playing awesome in practice, but you are completely tanking or just not playing that great in the game,
Right.
your skills didn't go anywhere. So it's obviously mental. You're obviously approaching your competition or game or event in a different way. And usually what I see with athletes is the fear kicks in. So they're like, I don't want to play bad. I can't mess up today, or I have to play really, really well. And they're approaching it differently than how they are in practice. You ask them, what's the biggest difference? Practice, I'm playing free. I'm not worried about making mistakes. I know I have another chance. Game time or competition time comes, and they're like, well, like, I can't make a mistake. They put so much more emphasis and pressure on the mistakes. And now they're looking to avoid the mistakes versus
Right.
just playing to compete. So it really is all in your mindset and how you're viewing it and how you're approaching the game.
How do you get them to not do that? Like, stop it. Stop
Mhm.
doing
Yeah.
that's not
Uh,
helping you.
yeah, yeah. One, I think setting like a nice little pregame routine. You want to make sure that their thoughts are on things that are going to help them. What's everything that you can lead into your game with that's going to create momentum for you? Typically hustling, talking, looking for passes. You want to get them to be very process focused.
Mhm.
If they're so focused on outcomes, like, oh, I want to score 20 points in my game today, but you're like, okay, well, how are you going to do that?
Right, right, right.
That's the good stuff right there. That's what you want them focused on.
Yeah,
Athletes can get so lost in those outcomes.
right.
And we're really breaking down all those what ifs, the what if thoughts that come in. I call it the imaginary what if world. What if I mess up today? What if I don't play well? What if I start off bad?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. We're turning those into better what if thoughts. Yeah. And just making sure that again, they're in that right energy state,
Mhm.
excited or relaxed, or we're talking about all of that kind of stuff.
And it's not even taking it sounds like it's not changing the what if things. It's trying to get you out of that altogether and say, no, no, just focus on what you're going to be doing. Right? Like
Yeah.
focus on the actual mechanics of your sport, how you're going to help the other teammates and all of those.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
that,
And sometimes like kind of going back to the goal question, especially in like a big game, like let's say the Super Bowl in 1991, right? Obviously your goal is to win the Super Bowl. But if you're thinking about winning the Super Bowl, that's not necessarily going to help you win the Super Bowl. So
Mhm.
sometimes just getting rid of those goals for the time being
Right.
is what's needed so you can stay in the moment and just execute one play at a time because that's what's going to lead you to victory. That's what's going to get you the
Right.
actual win.
Our son's tennis coach was a really good tennis player, and he said that his dad used to say to him before playing in a game, he'd say, "Just play beautiful tennis." Yeah, just play beautiful. It was such a nice like you
Yeah.
know, I mean, because it takes you out of that I have to win. I just hit, hit the ball
Yeah.
nicely, move your feet well, and
Right.
I suppose that's similar kind of a thing.
And
Absolutely.
that statement also can become part of their pregame routine. Well, I have a
Yeah.
question regarding the pregame routine. So, what do you say to someone who says part of my pregame routine is to wear the same sock and not to wash it for the whole season? How do you differentiate superstition from a routine?
That's
Yeah.
not superstition. That's true. If
Obviously,
you
no,
were,
no, no. For you,
Yeah,
for you, it's
that is actually rooted in science. There's research on it. Just kidding. But the socks are like that's kind
I
of
knew it. Don't
yeah,
even left
yeah.
to.
Dirty socks, they work. That's such a fun conversation to have with athletes. I always love asking them, what are your superstitions? Tell me. Baseball, oh my gosh, they have the weirdest and craziest superstitions. So we're really helping them. Okay, what is
Wait. You can't just leave
yeah,
that. Give it.
can you
oh
just let
oh
us
yeah,
know?
yeah. Like teams, you can't cross bats on the fence. Baseball guys usually like
It's-
would just how they put their clothes on, left
Mm,
sock, right sock. I have to tie this shoe. I have to wear this sweatband. I have to take my bat up every time this way. Uh, yeah,
But to
things
that
like that.
effect, though, like, is that so? That gets into. I think you were gonna bring up. What's the difference between like a pre game or a pre at bat routine
Uh
versus a superstition? So, for example, like baseball players, notoriously,
huh.
unvelcro, velcro, touch, etc.
Uh-huh.
Is that a superstition, or is that you're putting yourself in the right mindset?
Right. Superstitions, they could kind of play on feelings. So let's say if you don't do this, like you don't put your shirt on the right way, and now you're feeling bad, you're feeling like you're gonna have an off game. Superstition. Routines, those usually get you mentally and physically prepared, right? Obviously, if you don't like put your shirt on, like it's irrational. It's not gonna impact how you play in your game, right?
Oh, wow.
Routines can be modified, you can adapt them. There's something comfortable that you can come back to every single time. So,
Mhm.
right, it's there's
Yeah.
like a fine line, right,
Right.
between like what's rational and what's irrational here. We can have that conversation.
If someone has a superstition, do you try to get them to break it, or do you lean into it? Do you, like, did you that, if you put your shirt on wrong, make sure you go back and put your shirt on right, or else you,
Yeah. Right, right. Now you're gonna be like off the whole game. Yeah.
right.
Um, It depends, right? If it's not hurting them at all, like, okay, whatever, you do you. But when it starts hurting you, like, okay, I didn't do this, now I'm really thinking about it, then
Right.
we need to learn how to talk yourself down and how
Mhm.
to think rationally in the moment.
Right.
The superstitions, though, I've seen them lead into OCD. And I
Mhm.
have a couple athletes who have OCD, and one of my college volleyball players, this is a good story. She would be so terrified of not packing her things before a game. She would wake up like 3 times in the middle of the night, 4 in the morning, walk across campus to the gym, check her bag, make sure she has everything in it, walk back, go to sleep, wake up in another hour, do the same thing. That's obviously impacting
Right.
her sleep, how she's going to perform the next day. She's worried, she's stressed, anxiety. That's where we need to change something. And I would probably refer her out to work with a specialist on OCD.
Right.
Um, but like little things like, okay, I feel like I gotta tie my shoe on this way, right? Like, okay, if it's not hurting you, all right, but let's be rational about it. Let's make sure
Right.
that you know, like, this is just a superstition. It's not gonna help me play.
Right.
Mhm.
Have you guys seen Bull
Yeah,
Durham by any chance?
I haven't.
You haven't seen Bull Durham, and
No.
you've not seen it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, it's Kevin. It's a very well, for my generation, it's a famous baseball movie with Kevin Costner and Tim Robbins. And anyway, Kevin Costner's character convinces Tim Robbins' character that he needs to wear women's underwear to be a successful pitcher because he's upset with him about something else. Anyway, so and sure enough, he gets attached to that um to that superstition. And it's at some point in the movie, Tim Robbins' girlfriend says, "Why are you doing this to him?" And Kevin Costner said, "Look, you know as well as I do, if he believes that that's what's helping him, then he's got to ride it out. He's got to keep doing it, because that's helping."
Yeah. Well, I think the big line that we could draw there is routines are adaptable. Superstitions are not really adaptable for them. So let's say if you have a solid 1 hour long warm up routine, you arrive to the game late. You only have 30 minutes. You
Okay.
can adapt that routine, adjust the times on it, and still find that comfortable routine within that 30 long minutes, right? But if you don't tie your shoe right, you can't really like adapt that in
Right.
a way that's going to make you feel good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
So that could be a
Yeah.
litmus test for whether you're dealing with a routine versus a superstition, right? Whether it's adaptable or not.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. And well, yeah. And normally those conversations are very like informal and fluid. And those are
Right.
the fun ones to have with athletes. I gets them thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there different challenges with athletes involved in different sports, like combat sports versus motocross versus table tennis?
I think most of the challenges are across all sports. That's a great question. Maybe some mental skills are more important in some sports than others. For example, like um, martial arts or MMA, right? Like if you don't know how to control your emotions and stay composed, and if you get punched and you just get pissed off and you start wailing away chaotically, and that's not everything that you train for. You trained to be controlled, right? You don't train for chaos. That's gonna lose you
Mhm.
Right.
the match or the fight, right? Motocross can be very similar. Someone passes you, you wobble a little bit, okay, and then you get frustrated and you decide to just ram someone in the back, and then you crash both of you and take you out, right? Soccer, if you make a mistake, you get frustrated. Okay, if you're frustrated for 30 seconds, you can. It's not the best. You obviously want to have emotional composure, and we'll work on that. But you can get back into the game,
Mhm.
right? So I would say some skills are more important to have in some sports, but generally across all sports, we're working on the same things.
Because it's all about performance and getting
Well, yeah,
to the
all
court.
about performance and all those mental skills that are so transferable. And we'll get like people calling in, well, have you ever worked with pickleball or badminton or rock climbing, right? Like those are
Right.
just some like random sports that I work with. I'm like, no. And I'll do my research on the sport, but I
Yeah.
promise you
Not
that
right.
it'll be fine. Like
Right.
these mental skills are so applicable to every single sport.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's nice to not know a whole lot about their sport because it forces them to explain and break things down to me. And
Hmm.
I love to like ask them questions, and that can actually help them work through some stuff in their head.
Hmm.
Are there
That's interesting.
any specific niche sports that you got exposed to just by practicing?
Yeah, badminton was one, yeah. Motocross was one. Like, I had never even really thought of motocross, and I'm like the motocross specialist here. Like, I get all the motocross kids, which is funny to me. So I have so much knowledge on motocross up here. It's funny. Um, Other than like most of the popular sports, yeah, niche sports. I started with a rock climber, uh, ballerinas. I've learned a lot about ballet, which is fun. So that's one thing I love about my job is just learning so much from
Yeah.
everyone.
As you're working with different athletes, you come out from your training, right? And you start actually practicing. What have you changed your mind about going from didactic to practical?
Like specific things that we might be working on for that practice.
More so,
Like
thi-
things in theory that don't actually pan out in the real world. Like when the
y-
rubber hits the road kind of thing.
yeah, and basically it's sort of the adage of the military that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And you come out from training and you have all these tools and you have ideas of how it's going to work out, and then when you actually get into dealing with certain problems that come up, you find that certain things work and certain things don't, and you need to adapt certain concepts.
Yeah. The games are a awesome test. Whenever I'm working with an athlete for a long time and they're nailing these things and practices and scrimmages, and then they get to a game and everything just flies out the window. That gives us such a great foundation to work on going forward. I was working with a tennis guy. He was 15 and he was doing so great in his practice matches. As soon as he got into an actual tournament, oh, he lost all composure on the court, just completely
Mm.
basically gave up. So then we're like, okay, but we didn't really know how he was going to respond in a game, right?
Mm.
So then that gave us so much good stuff to go off of and break down. And we adapted, we adjusted, we figured out, okay, what will work for you. And we figured out a great thing for him. He now like writes, we made like this whole little mental reset in his notes and a little breathing exercise for him. And between every game, between every set, he grounds himself back down in his notes because he knows that whenever he gets emotional, it's foggy up here. It's hard to think about what you're supposed to think about, right? So he goes to his notes, grounds them, and he comes back out. We would have never figured that out though if he didn't have the actual game or tournament.
Mm.
So,
Right.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
you prepare them as best as you can, but you really don't know until they're in it.
How important is visualization with getting people ready and getting people to perform?
Oh, yeah. Such a great life skill that I think everybody needs to have. You need to be able to visualize yourself doing successful, awesome things. So, yeah, I think before the game, such a great tool to use. Let's
Yeah.
imagine yourself doing awesome things today. What's your game plan? What's your strategy? Let's go through that. What are you going to do in this scenario? That way, you already visualize yourself. You can see yourself doing it.
Mm.
It's going to make you feel more confident in your ability to do it when that situation arises. Yeah, it puts you in a good place, seeing yourself do good things. Very important, but before games, absolutely, I think. And that's a good skill that we're working on with all of our athletes for the most part.
Hmm. Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. There's something you were talking about getting over the fear of failure, right? That seems to be a
Oh,
really big one when people.
it is.
And we were talking with this Navy SEAL, a really great guy. He was talking about how to the same kind of thing, how to get over the fear of this, fear of that, and he has this exercise where he asks people to climb 100 foot um,
Wall.
wall,
Yeah.
and then to
Rappel down the wall to face the fear of heights.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
and I
Hmm.
I wonder if things like that, might the idea of conquering one of those fears. So people have fears of public speaking, of heights, of fear of failure, all sorts of things. But by getting good at conquering one fear in one venue, it has transferable effects to others. I wonder if that something like that Have you ever considered doing something like that with people who have real fear of failure, or does that sound totally crazy?
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think that's like all the hot topic conversation with cold showers nowadays.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure.
You know, all the research on taking a cold shower, right? Like, yeah,
Yeah.
who actually loves jumping into a cold shower, right? But you do that, oh my gosh, you feel much more confident in your abilities to conquer something else that's really hard and really
Mhm.
difficult. So yeah, that like exposure to different things, that's great. And I use so many analogies in my work with athletes to get them to see that, hey, you have done something very similar to this before.
Mm.
For instance, I was working with my rock climber the other day. She gets really scared if she can't see her next move, her next grab. And I said, okay, well, think about when you're driving at night. You drive at night all the time. You can't see 200 feet in front. You can probably only see like the next 100 feet in front of you, but you're trusting, you're still going. You're trusting your car and your headlights that they're going to guide you. And you keep going. You do it all the time. She's like, yeah, I guess you're actually right. So it's like,
Yeah.
you got to trust
Yeah.
that next hold, that next hand that, yeah, it's okay if you can't see the next 5 feet, but eventually you will be one grab and hold at a time, you're going to be able to. So yeah,
Yeah.
getting them to see what previous experiences they've been through is very helpful. And in my kind of approach with the fear is, yeah, we're definitely breaking down the fear, but we got to look at what we know to be true. For instance, I was working with a hockey guy the other day who's afraid of getting hit. He's been hurt a lot. And so we're like, okay, yes, you could possibly get hurt, but what do we know to be true? It hurts for a few seconds. Maybe you have to sit out for a shift. You have all this safety gear on for a reason. If you hesitate, it's going to lead to you getting hurt. If you fully commit, you're probably going to get the puck and maybe even hit this guy, and it's just going to be a lot better, more safer. You got to place the truth above the fear there.
Yeah.
We're breaking that down with like all their tiny little fears.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's also good that hockey is such a safe and non-contact sport.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Very safe. Those blades, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking when you mentioned the rock climber, I have a fear of heights, and I'm like, yeah, no, don't do that if you can't see their next hole. Then turn around.
Yeah. Stop. Hell down. That's the time to give up, right?
Absolutely right. Just that's it.
Unless you're wearing those socks.
Well,
And you're
then
okay.
you're fine.
Then you're fine.
If you have your
Yes.
sock on, you're
Your lucky sock on. You're really good. Uh-huh.
Is there a way, let's say if we have listeners that are not not veterans and playing from teenage years, but trying to get into sport. We have patients that want to be active and they're getting into pickleball. What would be your
That is so popular, by the way.
oh yeah, the
It's
fastest
so
growing sport in
popular.
America. Yes.
It is incredible.
So what would be your blueprint? Just a basic blueprint to start them off on the right way to approach the mental aspect of the game.
Mhm. I think this Zinovy is a great time to set some goals. Making sure that your goals are very realistic. If you start pickleball, you're saying, I want to be a 5.0 player. Not very realistic. Okay, let's maybe your first goal is just to learn the rules of the game this week. Awesome. Maybe your second goal is to learn a good forehand shot, a good overhand shot. You're setting very tiny, realistic goals to reach and making sure you're keeping the purpose at the forefront of your mind. If your purpose is to learn and to have fun, awesome. It's going to be a lot more enjoyable for you. But if you lose sight of that purpose and you get way too caught up in playing really great and messing up, it's not going to be very enjoyable for you. And making sure like you're surrounding yourself by others who are welcoming
Like-minded.
and open to learning, right? That's important too.
Because there's always people. I mean, I remember growing up, there was some parents of friends of mine who were really nice people, very high functioning, successful people in their own rights, but put them on a field and something happened to their brains. They get so competitive that they couldn't relax. They get in fights. It's like, who is this person? And it was, it's kind of sad because they really love the sport, but they just couldn't, even if it was like a kids on parents, game. Something clicks and then they're a crazy version of themselves that they don't want to be, and then they know it, but they can't seem to turn it off when they are put in those situations. Have
Mhm.
you seen that? And what do you do with people like that?
Yeah, I think the first thing we gotta break down what all of your expectations are heading into this game. Because if you think you shouldn't be making mistakes, for instance, and then you make a mistake, well, what are you doing? You're probably getting super frustrated.
Right.
But is that a realistic expectation to have that you shouldn't make mistakes? No, because you're gonna make mistakes,
Yeah.
right? So we need to break down all of those very irrational expectations that you have. And I think we hear the saying all the time, like, be yourself, just be yourself. We hear that from a very young age, which I think is great. Yes. But if you want to be more composed, if you want to be more confident, then don't act like yourself. Act like how a composed person would act until you become it.
Right.
Act how a confident person would act until you become confident.
Right.
Right. And so that's some of the things that I'm breaking down with an athlete is, let's give a challenging situation here. How would you respond emotionally? And what are the effects of the negative effects of that? How would a confident athlete respond here? And
Right.
we're breaking down those responses. And okay, next time you're in this challenging situation, this is the response that you're going to have until this naturally becomes it.
I like that a lot. I think that's true for again. I mean, so much of this is transferable, but a lot of times you pick a role model for that reason. Sometimes, right? You want to model your behavior on what you would like it to be. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
And going back to that, it probably should go back to our conversation earlier when you said why is more important than the goal. Because probably if someone remembers their why did they start to play pickleball? Well, because I wanted to play with my friends, spend more time with my friends, and also be active, then you're not going to be as frustrated about missing that, right? Missing that
Yeah.
ball. And if you can go back to that and remind yourself, then you're more likely to get to the actual goal. And by those means, get better at the game as well, right? I mean, I know for myself, I find myself in the weeds all the time because I find the sport that I like and I enjoy, and then I find that, oh, in order to get to better in that sport, for instance, not motocross but trail riding on a motorcycle, in order
Mhm.
to get better at that, most people that are good do trials riding. Great, let's try to get into that. And then I find myself, oh wow, okay, well this is how you get better at trials riding. And then I find, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? Oh, it was originally because I wanted to go ride. And why? Because it was
Yeah.
fun. Because so kind of getting myself back to that why has been helpful to not
Right.
drive myself crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important that you're breaking that down with athletes is when you become outcome focused, what do you start thinking about? What do you start doing? What do you start feeling? So they're able to really recognize it and then say, okay, let's remind yourself of your why every day. Let's come back to your why in those moments. Let's
Mhm.
think of your purpose going into it, but you're keeping why and the truth. Talk a lot about the truth too, especially with the fear of failure. Keeping those above everything else, oh my gosh, it's those things are gonna seem so small.
Yeah. That's
That's a good point.
that's a really good point.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like why think about the truth and then also focus on the minutia of the mechanics of what you're doing to get yourself out of your mind and helping
Mhm.
others around you.
For
Mhm.
someone who's
Yeah.
starting in a sport, it's probably too early to start establishing a routine, right? When do you reach a point when a routine becomes an important part to work on? Someone starts to get better, and someone starts to get into the game. At which point have you missed the window? I mean, I guess you never miss a window, but when do you want to approach that routine as part of your pregame?
Yeah. I think athletes, they have a routine whether they think they do or don't. Sometimes I'll ask an athlete, "What are you doing before a game? Like, walk me through it." It's just like a very general question that I'll throw out there. Like, I mean, I don't really have a routine or anything. I just do this, this, this. I'm like,
Right,
that you do that every time though, that kind of is your routine, right?
right.
And it could be something so silly, like I'm just talking with my teammates and then I make sure I eat something. I'm like, okay, so talking and messing around with your teammates, that's important for you.
Right.
It's probably a really good distraction for you. Getting something in your stomach, that sounds very important for you. Okay, and let's just bring awareness to those things. So you do know that these are good things that I want to make sure I'm doing every single time.
Right.
And then if athletes are like, well, sometimes I'll do this and sometimes I do that. And then to your questions, when it's starting to impact their performance and how they're feeling, that's when you need to make sure they're doing something consistent every single time beforehand.
Mm.
Like sometimes I'll have an athlete who is, let's say they eat like a huge meal before, and then they're like, jumping in the hot tub at home, and then they're going to their game. Like I had like an athlete do that one time. I'm like, oof, okay, your muscles are like noodly, probably right now. That's not good. It's like, no, we need to make sure you're doing something like very similar across all games. And athletes who I was working with a softball player a few weeks ago. She didn't have a game until like 4 p.m. one day. And she was just laying around watching movies the entire day. I'm like, oh, okay, well, you're probably feeling lethargic and tired and not very motivated to go play softball, right? So, like, you need to have a routine that Sunday morning. Like, let's make a little list what you're going to do hour by hour. She woke up, she already knew what she was doing that day. She was up and moving. So, sometimes the routine might change. But ultimately, like, she was doing similar things as to what she would be doing like at school, and then she had a game. She wasn't laying down all day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. That's
I
great.
think we covered a lot.
I think so.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
did cover a lot. That was fun. Thank you guys.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Sure, for sure. For sure.
I start visualizing and wearing a sock on my left foot.
Perfect.
The dirty one. The dirty one.
Obviously, I didn't think it needed to be said.
Yeah.
Well, where can people find on the internet or?
Yeah, they can find me at peakperformancesports.com. That's our private practice. And my email is georgia.miller@peaksports.com if you just want to email me directly.
Super
Perfect.
nice.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us about all of this. This was really fun and really interesting.
Informative.
Go.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys.
Friends, thank you for your attention. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation. If you find value, please remember to hit the like button, help us with our YouTube algorithm. Consider subscribing to the channel and turn on the notifications so you can stay up to date with everything going on with the channel. And please leave us a comment. Let us know what you thought about this show and also what you'd like to hear about in the future.